It's a dilemma for the news media and media consumers. When awful events occur with great frequency, how do you report it without burdening readers and viewers with tragedy fatigue? We've already seen it happening as suicide bombings in the Middle East get little attention while tragic events in Europe get more. The bizarre and brazen nature of last night's murderous rampage in Nice was an attack like none other. A large box truck barreled through a huge crowd celebrating Bastille Day, killing at least 84. The headlines from France, stark and simple, need no translation.
They come from video that we've turned into still images and tried to take out the color out because otherwise they're simply too graphic to show you.
This attack came just 8 months after an equally horrendous act of terrorism in Paris last fall, where 130 people were killed in a coordinated attack in restaurants and a concert hall. And the national press was equally outraged over the 2015 attack on the satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo that left 17 people dead. But other attacks where equal numbers of people die are often given short shrift.
This was 3 men, 3 bombs.
A suicide bombing at Turkey's main airport in late June, where 42 died, got coverage, but not so much. As a columnist for Time magazine put it last year when comparing Boko Haram coverage to Charlie Hebdo, when terrorists kill villagers in non-Western countries, it feels like one of many bad things that happen to poor people in faraway places. Let's hope we never feel that way about France. You know, one of the things about the 2 terrorist attacks, the big ones anyway, in France, was just the extraordinarily unusual circumstances of both of them. This large box truck, we've never seen anything like that. We'd never really seen anything quite like the coordinated effort in Paris other than September 11th here. You know, the coming at it from, one at a concert hall, restaurant. So that in itself gives the news media a different peg. There's a whole other discussion that takes place about how do you stop a truck from, running through a police line or a barrier or anything. On the other hand, I'll say, I admit it, I had to refresh my memory about some of the recent suicide bombings. I was even confused about Brussels. I mean, I couldn't remember when that happened. I mean, they go just into another place. These kinds of things, Charlie Hebdo sticks in my mind, also because it was unusual, but I admit I'm as guilty as the next person about kind of putting suicide bombings in a separate category.
I think that we, in the media, tend to look at Europe in the same light that we look at our own country. Mm-hmm. I think there's a holdover from years past where we tend to look at ourselves as kind of a European nation, and so when something happens in Europe, it gets much more attention. Now, there have been horrible terrorist attacks in recent months in Turkey, mm-hmm. in Iraq, in Bangladesh, and you're right, they don't get anywhere near the same level of attention. And I think that we need to understand that we've become much more diverse and much more multicultural. And in fact, these attacks come home very much for a lot of Americans whose heritage is from other parts of the world.
I also think, though, that sometimes when attacks happen in places where you have frequent attacks, and it has been historically a place that's very dangerous, people, at least in this country, tend to sit back and say, oh, well, that's always been happening there. But then when it takes place in a country that it typically doesn't occur, and then you have something, as you pointed out, the visual of this truck barreling through a crowd, people are there on vacation, having a good time, that added dynamic, I think, changes just a bit.
Yeah, I think Dan nailed it. I can't really fault anyone for shrugging off a report of a new terrorist attack in Baghdad, for example, where we've seen this happen for years and years and years, and responding in a more shocked and outraged way to something like what happened in Nice the other day. There are ways, though, for the media to push back. There was an attack recently, and I'm embarrassed to admit I can't remember which one. I think it was one in Baghdad. But one media outlet, I think was the Times, profiled individuals who had lost their lives in this attack, and if you make these people not just Iraqis or not just people in the Middle East, but if you actually show that these are people with lives, family members, professions, ambitions, dreams, then you can shake us out of, I think, what is sort of natural complacency.
Right.
Well, I think there's a couple things. First of all, yes, you do make a decision about places where you think bad things always happen. Yes, if something is very new, then it gets more coverage. And I would flip a little bit of what you said, Dan, because now in France, this is the third attack. So now we've had quite a number. So the newness is, I guess, that it's quite a number. Wonder what happens on the fourth one. I think the same thing will happen because we relate to that.
Yes.
Let me remind you that in terms of seeing something new, the shopping mall attack in Kenya was horrific. We hadn't seen that kind of soft target. And yet, it still didn't get the level of coverage that we could have.
It got a lot.
It got a lot, but I'm just saying.
Boko Haram.
right.
But that disappeared even though the girls are still gone.
Yeah, so I'm just saying that.
If that had happened in America, we'd still be doing that.
We have to question ourselves
Yeah.
about this as
You're
we're
right.
covering it.